Welcome to Creative AI. This is the first episode, podcast / YouTube show. I'm David Usher, and most of you might know me as a musician, but I also run a company called Reimagine AI, and we are an artificial intelligence creative studio that builds primarily virtual beings for science centers or technology centers, museums, public spaces, entertainment properties, all those kind of things online. So I've really gotten into this space between art and AI. And as I've delved deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole, what I found is there are all these fascinating people building all these incredible things. And with this podcast, I want to bring on the creatives and talk to them about their process, what they're doing in art, what they're doing in AI, how they're merging these two fields together to create new things. It really is a new medium to work in. And I feel very lucky that on this very first show, I have my good friend, Pablo Samuel Castro. He is a researcher from Google Brain, and he is also an incredible musician. So he's done a lot of work with music and AI. I worked with him myself on something called Lyric AI, which is an artificial intelligence that could collaborate with humans writing song lyrics. And he's also worked on a new VR game called Agence that I want to talk to him about, where the characters have their own changing, growing personalities. I don't actually know much about it, but we're going to get into it. So let's get into it now with Pablo Samuel Castro from Google. So Pablo, welcome to the very first episode. You are the lucky winner.
Hey, well, happy to be the winner.
So where are you right now?
I am in my bedroom in Ottawa.
Fantastic. And how's your pandemic going?
It's going well. I mean, obviously it's a difficult time for everybody. I guess I'm fortunate in that I have a job that wasn't totally affected by or as affected by the pandemic as other people's jobs, in that most of my work is done on a computer, so I could do it really anywhere. And I was already kind of working remotely half of the time anyway, so it's been nice being at home a lot. I was traveling a lot before the pandemic, so this has forced me to stay home, which has been really nice, just to be with the kids and the family and all that.
Yeah, for me, it was nice for the beginning, and then by now I'm like, okay, maybe a little traveling.
Yeah, I get you. Totally.
Did you get a dog?
We did. So we got a pandemic puppy.
Pandemic puppy, excellent. I was thinking dogs the other day online. I was like, maybe I'm allergic, but maybe.
Yeah. So I was the one that wasn't super enthusiastic about it, but they I don't know if they convinced me or they just went ahead and got it.
Either way.
But either way, I'm happy. She's a cute puppy, and she's pretty well behaved and all that.
Excellent. So listen, man, I want to talk to you. What we're doing on this show is we're really talking about creatives in art and AI, and you are the perfect person because you're doing all these things in art and AI. You're an incredible musician, and you are also at Google, merging these things together. So I wanted to talk to you about all the things you're doing, but three in particular: what we did with Lyric AI, your music, and then what you did with, I think it's Agence. Is that right?
Yep.
And what you did with Agence. So let's start with how did you get into both music and AI, and how do they merge?
So music, probably like you, has been a part of my life for most of my life. So I started playing piano. I mean, I started singing to Latin American kids pop music when I was 2. And then at 6, I started playing piano, and I've been playing piano since. So that's many, many years of, I won't reveal how many, but many years of piano playing. And so music has always been a part of my life. I've been in bands, recording albums and doing live shows since I was, 15 or something. So that's been the constant. Computers, I got into in high school. I guess when I learned programming, I really got into what you could do with it. And I think looking at it in retrospect, I think part of what attracted me so much to it was the creative component of it, where you could have an idea, create an idea, and also be creative in the way you implement that idea in a way that works. So I went to school so I did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in computer science. But they were sort of parallel interests for most of the time. So music was one thing that I did one part of my day, and then computer science was a different thing. I did consider doing a PhD in sort of combining AI and music, actually with Douglas Eck, who's the head of Magenta at Google, who you've met. But at the time, the technology for AI for generating music and that type of thing was still pretty basic. And what worried me was that if I did my PhD in that I would spend it would ruin the musical aspect for me a little bit. So I liked having the music as a separate thing that had nothing to do with technology or not much technology at the time, and it was really just something that I did musically, creatively, without the need of any tools I mean, obviously guitars and amplifiers are tools, but I didn't have to write software to make it sound sound good. But then I took a kind of hiatus, an enforced hiatus from research for like 5 or 6 years, and I came back to it at about the time we met.
Right.
And when I came back to it, everything had changed. Deep networks were now a thing that were actually working, and so the power of these generative models was really incredible. And so for me, that basically stepped away from all of this research world and came back. It was kind of like I stepped into a time machine. Wow. And before I left, it was still kind of dinky melodies being played with MIDI, single note. And then when I came back, you have these like polyphonic pieces being generated. It was astounding. And so then I got excited by it again. And so that's why I sort of started merging these two more and more lately. That being said, I think since the last year or two, the way I view this, at least my approach to this combination of AI and music, which is for sure how you view it as well, is I like to view it more from an artistic perspective rather than a scientific perspective. Right. So I mostly do my research in reinforcement learning, but I do some research in this intersection of AI and music. But at that intersection, I like to have more of an artist hat than a researcher hat. Just because if we are going to be using these for producing music or art, I think that art has to take precedence over the.
An aside, but do you feel like your brain is using different parts when you're doing? You know what I mean? Or is it the same part applied in different ways?
That's an interesting question. I think the thing I love about music and performance in particular is that it's much more fast. It's more online, right? If you're on stage, you can't say, "Oh, undo, I made a mistake." Like you have to go with it. You know how it is. Yeah. And I love that. I love that about it. And actually, nowadays that we're recording talks, I mean, before when we used to give talks in person, that was in a sense an improvisation. I mean, you could memorize your speech, but that's like memorizing a song. You still have to deliver live. And nowadays, when I record my talks, most of the time I just do one take because I like to keep that improvisation aspect to it, where you have to be on your feet and you can't rely so much on going back and redoing things.
What I'm wondering is though on the creation side, never mind the performance side, if you can leave that up for a sec, the actual creation side, do you feel like it's the same building process in your brain, or is it another side for you? Because I've looked at these things, the way I build things in different media, different verticals, to be very similar in the way I'm sort of going through a process.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's a different?
So I guess there's differences and similarities. Some of the more important differences, I think, when you're writing a song, right, you don't know what the song is going to sound like. That's the exciting part, right? You're kind of playing around with your instrument or an idea or a melody you have in your head or a lyric theme or whatever. When you're writing software, depending obviously on the type of software you're writing, but for instance, I want to write a pipeline that will take this chunk of text and format it in a particular way. So there's a clear end goal. And obviously you have to be creative in the way you implement your code, but you know when you're done.
Right.
Like when the software is doing the thing that you wanted it to do, you're done. And
Yeah.
maybe it's not the optimal, whatever. But a song, I mean, you can never be done. Like you can always improve on it or keep on working on it. At one point, you have to record it if you want to like sell it or whatever. But I think that part is a really important difference in that the creative side of things is much more open-ended in the sense that you don't know where you're going to end up and you start playing around with things. And I think there is an aspect of that in research. Sometimes you just kind of play around with ideas and you don't really know, you kind of have a vague idea of like, I want to improve this particular algorithm because it doesn't learn very well with this data set. And so I have some ideas for why it might not work very well. And so let's try this thing. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this other thing. So in research, I find there's that similarity in that you don't know really where you're going and you're just kind of playing around. But it's a lot, it can be slower scale. Sorry.
So when we met when you were already at Google. And do you remember who connected us? Do you remember
Hugo La Rochelle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think we met almost like a week after I joined Google Brain.
Really? I didn't realize that. I thought you were home there, and when I was walking in,
no. So
you were too.
Yeah. So I was completely. So I mean, I had been at Google already. I don't know, like 5 or 6 years.
But at Montreal.
But this is when I had already, in my mind, left research forever. Right. And so I was working on, at that time I was in Chrome and I was building back-end infrastructure. It was for machine learning applications, but it was more like pure software engineering, just building backends and that type of thing. And it was super interesting. I loved it, by the way. But anyway, Brain opened and I emailed Hugo and I was like, hey, I'm here. I have a PhD in this stuff. Like maybe you can make use of me. And at the time when I wrote him, he was like, right now we're still building up, so maybe I'll keep you in mind. And then I think it was like a year later, he wrote me and he's like, are you still interested? And of course I jumped at that opportunity. And so we met and he kind of just was asking what I'm interested in. And so I mentioned music and that like I've always been interested in this stuff. And then I think you wrote him like the next day.
I think so. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so he forwarded me that. And he's like, are you interested in this? And I was like, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that was like the project that we started working on. I mean, that was one of my first projects in Brain.
Now I'm going to leave links to all these projects, all things you're working on in the description. But can you describe in your, like, I have my memory of it, but can you describe what we were working on, what we were trying to build?
Yeah,
we were trying to build.
So I remember the first meeting we had. I mean, I'm probably misremembering things. So if something doesn't gel with the way you remember it, please interrupt me. But I remember we met and you had this idea of recording an album where each song would be like a different AI technology and the artist would use it in a different way.
Right.
And so we were all excited by it and said, okay, let's start with one idea. And then we'll see how it goes from that. And so I think you suggested let's do lyrics because that's what I'm most passionate about, and there doesn't seem a whole lot out there doing lyric writing with AI technologies. So I think we agreed on that, and so I started just poking around and playing around with whatever was out there already, and I found some data sets online for lyrics, and we started kind of playing around with what we could do. But from the beginning, I think we all agreed that what we wanted was not something like a purely generative model where you just press a button and here's your next top 40 hit and you don't have to do anything. Like you just then sit behind a guitar and sing the lyrics that it produced. Like I think we always wanted to have this interactive thing where whatever we built would be a tool that the songwriter could use to...
A collaborative tool.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my memory of it. So what process, do you want to describe the process of how we got to where we were and where you thought we got to?
Yeah. So as I said initially, and this is the way I usually approach new projects, is there's likely something out there that kind of does what I already want to do. So I think I found Andrej Karpathy, who's a well-known researcher. He had this blog post called the incredible effectiveness of language models, something like that. I don't remember the title exactly. Anyway, it was basically talking about how powerful some of these language models can be and how much structure they can learn from English language. And so he had his code, and so I think it was written in Lua, which is this programming language that hardly anyone uses right now in the research world. But so I ran that code, I think, on a data set of lyrics that I found online, and so we got something. It was mostly nonsensical, but it was something. It wasn't complete gibberish. There were some words there. So that was the starting point. And then I think at around this time, the "Attention is All You Need" paper came out from Google, which introduced this new architecture, the transformer architecture, that really showed that you could these models could learn long-term structure. Because I think part of the issue with previous models was that if you just read them, they kind of read like a stream of thought type of thing, where you started somewhere and then it just kind of veered off to wherever. And so locally, things kind of made sense. But if you looked at the long-term structure, it just was nonsense. Like, it didn't make any sense at all. And these transformer architectures, I think, really were able to show that you can capture some of this long-term structure. So we started playing around with those. Luckily, since I was at Google, I had access to the code. Even though it was open source, we had like the authors, our colleagues, so I could bug them to help me get the stuff working. And so we managed to train these models that worked a lot better. And then we started. So you start with an idea and you say, sure, we'll train a language model to do lyrics, and that's fine. Sounds not so hard to do, but one of the things I find, and it started to die down a little bit, but for a while, when AI was like super hyped in the media and all that, you only saw like the final end product. This is amazing. AI can do so many things. So everybody wanted to have AI in their product, in their company, whatever. But there's a lot of hard work and not black magic, but there's a lot of sort of folk knowledge that you need to get these things to work. Like, they do not work out of the box. There's a lot of hard work that has to go into. There's a lot of engineering that has to go into it to get it to really do what you want it to do. And so that's when we started uncovering the important details of what we wanted to do. So, for instance, one of the first ones we found is we don't want to train just on lyrics, because the data sets we found they had a lot of spelling mistakes. They had a lot of bad words.
Lyrics are kind of dumb.
They're kind of dumb.
Overall, as a data set.
Yeah. The topics they talk about are very limited. So there's like party, love, obviously, and
booty.
I mean, yeah. So the vocabulary also wasn't very varied.
Yeah.
So one thing that was interesting is that these models, they're the way they're trained, they're trying to do as best as they can on average, right? So that means that as long as they get on average okay, if you just look at the metrics at the loss function or the accuracy or whatever, it seems to be doing okay. And then when you try running it, sometimes you'll find that it just keeps on producing the same thing over and over again, because that is sort of like the average lyric. Yeah. So at the time, I remember I would use this in talks a lot. The average pop line was, "You know that I'm the one."
I've used that in a talk too. Yeah.
And you can add the comma baby, and that still gives you good accuracy.
And that's a Britney Spears song. Boom.
Is it?
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe just learn to copy that line, and it's like that.
That one line.
Yeah.
And then there was rhyming as well. Rhyming, like there were many layers to this thing, I remember.
Exactly. So then that made us realize we can't just take this out of the box model and just throw a lyrics data set at it, because it just won't do what we want it to do. Like, writing lyrics is an extremely complex process, even though often like people think of musicians as like these lazy people that just lie around playing guitar or whatever. But it's a really computationally intensive process, and this this project really made me appreciate it all the more, how complex a process it is. And so one of the things we started doing is trying to impose some of the structure that we use as songwriters when writing lyrics. Trying to impose that structure on these language models. So, for instance, the rhyming was one of the first things we started trying to do, and here again is where the details are important. So the way we trained the data set is we modified the data set so that each line would include the phoneme at the end of the line, so that you'd see like, I don't know, car and far end with the same phoneme. So the idea was the model will learn how to rhyme things, and it kind of ended up learning how to do that. But again, because of this average thing, it would, for instance, anything that ended in ed, I think it would rhyme with red or something. So no matter what you threw at it, it would always finish the line with red, even if it didn't really make sense.
Yeah.
The vocabulary was another issue. I think this is one of the things that I really appreciated about our collaboration, that at one point, I think, I don't remember where we were in the model, but it was doing reasonably well. Like, it was coherent. It was sort of rhyming. And I remember I was excited to show you, and I showed it to you. And your comment was like, there are no names there. It's all he and she. And
no nouns. Yeah.
no nouns. Yeah.
No nouns. Yeah.
Exactly. And that was a very, very valid.
What I call identifiers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you think of the Beatles, like there's me and Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, Michelle, Julia. Like there's concrete characters that you can relate to, not he or she, just only that. And so that was a very valuable thing that I think made us realize that, I think at that point we were still using lyrics but trying to impose these structures. And so what we started trying to do at that point is to sorry, my screen keeps turning off, so I have to put my password. What we started trying to do at that point is combine two of these language models. So one trained on lyrics for the structure so that it kind of looks like a song. So it has, like, it isn't just like a one big paragraph, it's actually split into verses. And another model that was trained on fiction books. And that model was more meant to capture these like identifiers that you're mentioning.
Language, right? It gave us language.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Exactly. So we've chained them together, and this is actually still the overall structure of what we're using now. Because I don't know if you know, but we're still kind of working on this model.
Okay.
It's been a little slow lately, but it's still, we're hoping to release something soon. But it's still the same idea where we have a chain of two models. So the first model is trained on lyrics, and what it's trying to do is just give you the structure. So if you give it the first line, it sort of figures out, okay, there's many syllables. These are the accents in the syllables, and this is the phoneme that it ends on. And so then it'll produce, this is the structure for the next line. So I want it to have this many syllables, the accents to be in these particular syllables, and this is the last phoneme, but there's no words in there. So we're not using the lyrics data set for any actual words.
Right.
And then that structure gets sent to a different model that's trained on the fiction books, and the fiction book sort of fills in the gaps and says, okay, for these 3 syllables, I'm going to use, I don't know, what's a 3-syllable word? Computer. And for this 1-syllable word, I'm going to use my or something, you know. And it knows the last phoneme, so then it's going to try to find a word that ends with that phoneme so that it rhymes. It doesn't always get it right, but it does fairly well. And so the model is working pretty well. On Twitter, I've occasionally posted things like for fun. Just I'll generate lyrics. With this other researcher in Georgia Tech that has his own lyrics model. But what we're hoping to do is release it publicly, the code and the model, so that people can play with it.
Fantastic.
What's been holding us back is that we're migrating libraries. So we're moving from TensorFlow to JAX. And that's just taken a little more time than
the bar was always, we were trying to get to a place, and you're still trying to go to a place where it could be a collaborator, right? You're writing with somebody that's actually a good writer that can they can bring you places where your own imagination couldn't take you yourself, and inspire different thoughts and different ideas, different pathways. And so I'm looking forward to trying it out and seeing where it goes. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, so I'm really excited exactly for people like you to try it out. And so we have a lot of the pieces are in place. It's just the new models that we're training with this, since we're done migrating, but the models aren't quite working. So we're trying to, there's a bug somewhere. the important details that I mentioned.
Now, I've been watching online, and you are releasing a lot of videos on stuff of your own music, mixed with different visualization. Can you describe what you're doing now, like with your own music, with AI? What the hell are you doing?
So those videos are another kind of pandemic purchase this summer was this thing that I've been dreaming of getting for a long time. It's called a disclavier piano, and so it's a regular acoustic piano. So it's actually exactly the same piano I had before. But this one has a digital component to it. So it's a regular acoustic piano, but it has sensors that detect the keys I'm playing and the strength I'm playing the keys in. And it converts all of this to MIDI or to digital format. And so I can send that to my computer. So now on my computer, I can capture exactly what I'm playing on an acoustic piano. And what's really cool is that then I can also send a signal from my computer to the piano, and the keys move on their own.
Okay.
So what's really neat about this is that now I can write software that will do stuff based on what I'm playing, but it ends up being like this kind of ghost that's playing piano with me. And so I have this accompanist, and it again, coming back to this collaboration and sort of pushing you to places that you wouldn't normally go to. The approach, how you approach playing piano, depending on what software you're using, changes drastically. And so it really is challenging in a good way in that. So I have all sorts of different types of responses that I can encode in the piano, and they really, you have to think carefully about how you're going to process, especially improvisation, how you approach improvisation so that it sounds good, at least to me. So a lot of the things I'm exploring right now are visualizing what I'm playing in a way that adds to the performance. So one thing I've been thinking a lot about is nowadays, I don't know, I find few people sit down and listen to an album.
Yes.
Like they'll want to watch a video, they want to go to YouTube, or they just want to see a TikTok or something. And most people don't watch it on mute. There's like a sound accompanying a video, and I think it's the almost like an overloading of senses, where you have to have your senses overloaded by the sound and the video. And when you think of live performance, which we don't have that much anymore, like people go and sit and they face the stage, and so they're not on their. I mean, they shouldn't be on their phones in a concert. They're watching the performance, so they're being stimulated. Their eyes and their ears are being stimulated, and maybe their scent as well with whatever's being cooked or the beer they're tasting or whatever. And I think now that everything is sort of online, like just releasing a SoundCloud is fine, but I think it gets a lot more appreciation and a lot more. You stimulate people a lot more if you can accompany your musical performance with something that's visually compelling and that's also driven by the performance. And so that's what I've been exploring a lot. Like, how can we complement the musical performance with visual art? Essentially.
Yeah, it's a strange mix right now because so much music is consumed with visuals
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But there is also, I mean, my kids often are on the headphones and just purely lost in the song as well. So it's we'll see where it leads. We'll see where it
Exactly. But often the headphones, why are they with headphones? Is because they're walking somewhere or they're doing dishes or something like.
They're trying to blow their parents.
Yeah, or true. Or they're in the car and they don't want to talk to them. But I mean, when I put on headphones when like I'm working, and so I want music to I mean, I'm listening to music all day. And I try to make time. So I have a record player, and I like that you put on a record and plays an album from start to finish. And I like to sit down and just kind of listen to it, because I think it's a different appreciation for the music that we don't have as much anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the visual stuff I'm making is kind of against that, because it's sort of forcing you to also stimulate your eyes. But I think I'm excited by that prospect of being able to deliver both a visual and an auditory stimulus. But the other thing that sort of what originally drew me to that is in terms of live performance. So right now it's one direction, right? So my live performance affects the music, but ultimately what I'd like to get to is somewhere where you have a feedback loop. So you perform and you generate some visuals, and that sort of by playing around with it, you kind of get an idea for what types of notes or chords or whatever you play generates what type of visuals. And so if you want to sort of get a particular visual, that you have to kind of control the way you play. And so the visuals are in a sense affecting your performance, which then affect the visuals, and you have this kind of closed feedback loop.
You could actually do it as a sensory thing too. If you surrounded yourself with visuals, the playing would influence, and the visuals would surround you and influence your You see
Yes,
VR as well, actually.
exactly. So actually, there's this jazz piano player who's actually been quite a big influence on the stuff I do. And I've met him a bunch of times, and we regularly chat online. His name is Dan Tepfer,
Okay.
and he has a disclaimer. He's had a disclaimer for a while, and he actually helped me in selecting my disclaimer. And he has this album that he released on I think on CD, but also on YouTube. It's called Natural Machines, and he does exactly that, where he plays piano and he has visuals that accompany his piano playing, and he has the sort of piano playing back at him and him collaborating with the piano. But for a few shows, he had this thing where he has a VR headset, so all the audience also gets VR headsets. And so the visualizations that he makes are in VR, and so he can't actually see the piano. He can only see the visualizations that he's generating. So he's completely immersed in that and performing with that, which is super neat and also a little terrifying that you can't see the piano.
Absolutely. I also wanted to talk to you about what you're doing with Agents.
Mhm.
Because I've been hearing a lot about it. I've seen some videos online, and some people were talking about you and talking about that game. And
Mhm.
I just wanted to know what your involvement was with it, and what it's like and what it is. Can you describe what it is?
Sure. So Agents, it's made by the studio in Toronto. They're called Transitional Forms,
Yeah.
and the idea is to have this. It's kind of a game, kind of almost like an art exhibition. It's almost like a film. So I think the Pietro, the director, I think I've heard him refer to it as a dynamic film, a dynamic interactive film.
Okay.
So the reason it's dynamic or interactive is because the user or the viewer can actually place things on the film, like physical objects that affect how the movie sort of unfolds. And so the idea is that you have this planet that's kind of, it's sort of a weird planet in that it has gravities, so it has its own gravity, but it's also sitting in a vacuum that has its own gravity.
Yeah.
So you have these entities, these little alien things that are kind of walking around this planet, but if they go over the edge, they fall into the vacuum, and they go away forever. And so they're sort of walking around this planet, and okay, the user can place this. It looks like a tree, and we refer to it as the MacGuffin. That's a film term that I can talk about later if you want. But this MacGuffin, basically, the little aliens are drawn to, and they want to consume it. But the tree, as it grows, it has its own sort of physics and its own weight, and sort of it can tilt the planet. And so now there's this trade-off between balancing the planet and trying to get this tree. And so a lot of it was inspired from this experimental film, I think from 1960 or something, where it's a plane that's floating in a vacuum, and you have these four tall men, and then this treasure chest appears, and they're trying to get to the treasure chest without sort of falling off, and so they have to trade off these things. And in the end, it ends up with one of the characters in one corner of the plane and the treasure chest in the other corner. And so he can't get the treasure chest because as soon as he walks over
Right.
the center, he'll tip over and they'll both fall over. So he ends up alone and without the treasure. So that's the idea that kind of inspired it. And where I came in is that they were interested in using AI to uh, give an extra edge to this and give something that's even more dynamic. So the little aliens, they're actually trained with reinforcement learning,
Okay.
and so they are big. They're not static rules. They're trained agents that have been trained with different scenarios, and so wherever you place the tree affects how they perform, and it depends how they've been trained and all that.
Do they learn over the over a single game, or are they trained and they learn continually over multiple games by multiple users?
So right now, the way it works is I think they're no longer learning. So in the deployed version, they've already been the learning has stopped.
Okay.
So we went through a long process of training them and sort of figuring out again all the important details that have to happen for
Yeah.
these things to work. Um, the really interesting thing is that in reinforcement learning, typically for the most of reinforcement learning history, we are dealing with a single agent typically that's interacting with an environment. But in this case, we're dealing with 5 different agents that affect each other.
Right.
And so that makes it a lot more challenging, and you have the dynamics just become a lot more complicated, and it's really difficult to sort of anticipate what's going to happen. And there is some work, quite a growing body of work in the research community on this multi-agent reinforcement learning setting, because you can have cooperative agents, you can have competitive agents, and all of this is determined by how you design your environment. And so that's one of the things we've been playing with, trying to find this balance of cooperation versus competitiveness, because if they're too competitive, they just end up punching each other the whole time, and they don't really care about the tree. If they're too cooperative, then it ends up really boring.
Right.
And so what we find is sort of training them with different objectives, in a sense.
Okay.
And so some of them are a bit more competitive than others, some are a bit more collaborative, and that dynamic mix lends itself to interesting.
Does the user's interaction affect them in different ways all the time, in terms of the user does an action and then their relationship will change based on their training?
Yes, exactly. So they, depending where you place the tree and depending where they're positioned, they may react in different ways. And so one thing I'm remembering is that you can turn off the AI for each independent agent. So there are these little agents that can obey just kind of static rules that are still pretty interesting, but you can control how many of them are using an AI brain.
Oh,
and that changes the dynamic as well. So there's all sorts of different combinations that you can try, and that will sort of affect how the game plays out. And I think one of the things they're interested in doing is in having people, other people, train different types of brains that you can then upload, and so have with all sorts of different behaviors that you can sort of pull from, which I think is a super cool idea.
It's a very cool looking game too. I mean, I'm going to I'll leave a link, because it's it's conceptually very interesting, and they've chosen interesting characters, and I'm curious. So, but game to game, do the character, if I'm playing as user X, will it remember things that it's learned before? Not, or is it all baked in each time?
So I don't think it will remember
over the individual user even.
Yeah. I don't think it will remember what you're doing, and this is, I don't know the details of that part of the game as well, but I don't think that's happening. But what I do think is that it would be very difficult to exactly replicate an experience that you just had,
right,
because there's so many factors of variation, and depending on where the agents are positioned and when you place the tree, you will have different behaviors occurring. And also, if I'm not mistaken, in the way the algorithm that they use to train their agents, it has some randomness to it in the sense of how it picks its actions. So even if you exactly replicated the steps in your previous game, and you place the tree at exactly the right millisecond and in exactly the right coordinate that as you did before, you might not get the same resulting behavior, just because of this randomness that's in the game, which also makes it more interesting.
That's great, man. That's very cool. So what is next for you? Like, where are you headed in your own, where's your brain headed with this, with what you're building, would you say?
So I'm still working with the Transitional Forms team. They have a few projects that they're working on. Again, with them, I'm more of a, I guess, a consultant kind of, in the sense that they're doing most of the hard work, and I just meet with them once a week, and sort of we throw ideas around. So that's something that I'm pretty excited about what they're doing. On the music front, there's a few projects I have in mind. None of them has really, so there's the lyrics project that is still ongoing, and I'm hoping to release that soon, but there's a few other ideas that I have floating around. It's just been a question of time that I haven't had a chance. When you start a new project, especially in this day and age, there's a lot of upfront coding and implementation that has to be done, that is kind of gritty work. And so I may be starting to supervise some PhD students next year. Everything's been sort of delayed because of COVID and all that. So One of them, I believe, is going to be working on this intersection of music and AI. So I'm excited for those ideas. A lot of the work I'm doing now is more on the reinforcement learning side, but I'm starting to look at different ways of sort of bringing it outside of the lab and into kind of the real world. So Agence is an example of that. But I also have a collaboration with the Bank of Canada that we actually got a Best Paper Award for this workshop at NeurIPS next month. That's using reinforcement learning to try to understand the dynamics of bank transactions. Which is kind of interesting, not so much creative, but sort of trying to come outside of the lab in a sense. On my own musical side, I think I don't have anything right now that I'm actively working on, and I think I want to arrive at it organically.
Yeah, I understand.
So, like, I'm actually working on a new project right now. Like, it's a personal project that's using this piano, and it's sort of combining computer science, music, and education in a sense. And I'm really excited about that because it's combining these two, but in a creative way. So there's a performance aspect to it as well. And I'm hoping that following that path will eventually lead me back to being able to use these AI technologies in a kind of creative way.
Awesome, man. Hey, thanks so much for being the first.
No, sorry, my screen turned off again.
That's all right.
This was great. Thanks for inviting me, and it's an honor to be the first one.
And we will catch up when we can get together over a drink, whenever the hell that is.
Yeah, can't wait.
Thanks very much, man.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thanks, brother.
Are all around, talking, dancing, drinking, laugh and scream. This could last forever, forever tonight. Bury our emotions, scotch tape up our hearts, that open from 1,000 tiny paper cuts. Life gives up so easily. She's laughing alright. Still see the stars. I can still see the stars. Breathe in and breathe out again as the colors fly by. All the memories collide. I see the stars. Falling, break as we get old. Hold on to you so tightly, we just lay there staring up at this endless sky. It's passing us by. I still see my babies reflected in your eyes. A million shining questions, a raging river of innocence and wonder. It's passing us by. Fly by. All the memories collide. we'll see the stars.